Thank you for tuning in with us. I'm here sitting with Pastor Sasha and my brother John, and I'm glad you guys could join us for our Sabbath School study on Mark, Lesson 5, entitled Miracles at the Lake. John, what were your thoughts on this lesson?
I find it interesting that Jesus, whether he chooses or it's just happenstance, he ends up spending a lot of time, at least of what's recorded for us, around and sometimes on the Sea of Galilee. And I wanted to know, is there significance to that? Was there intentionality behind Jesus being there?
Yes, the fact that Jesus was around the Sea of Galilee and the fact that he was received much better in Galilee than in Judea was prophetically predicted in the book of Isaiah. If you can look at Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2.
Nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, as when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward more heavily oppressed her, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, in Galilee of the Gentiles. Wow. Okay.
And verse 2.
The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined.
What kind of light is Isaiah talking here?
Jesus was the light of men.
Well,
The Son of Righteousness.
correct, because all this poetry, shortened. Here is the essence of the light, verse 6.
And isn't verse 2 also quoted in at least one of the Gospels?
Gospel of John, that's
Okay.
where we have the light of the world.
Wow.
That's exactly right. And verse 6, let's just remind our viewers what this is very famous verse.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
So it's kind of complicated to explain within 2 minutes all the message of the book of Isaiah in this particular passage, because it goes all the way from chapter 7 all the way to chapter 12. But in essence, we have a situation where all these, you see Zebulun, Naphtali, what is he referring to here?
The tribes.
Yes. Yeah. And if you look at the map of the tribes of Israel, these tribes, Zebulun, Naphtali, they are around the Sea of Galilee. That's where their land is. And Isaiah describes the Assyrian invasion, and all these tribes were taken to Assyrian captivity. And in Isaiah, it's chapter 8, it's described what led to this problem. It says here, let's start with Isaiah chapter 8, verses 19 through 22.
When they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. They will pass through the land hard-pressed and famished, and it will turn out that when they are hungry, they will be enraged and curse their king and their God as they face upward. Then they will look to the earth, and behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be driven away into darkness.
I can't help but think, as I'm reading Mark, we notice in Mark chapter 5 that there's a man with an unclean spirit. And as John was reading Isaiah 8, it talks about spiritists.
Exactly.
I'm curious about this, Pastor, because how is it that a man that's demon-possessed by an unclean spirit bow down and worship Christ?
Very important. So, to finish the thought on this Galilee, as you can see, the prophecy was telling that these tribes would be involved in in demon spirit through the idol worship, and that is going to lead them to darkness. What is, the chapter division sometimes doesn't help. What saves them from darkness is that light of Jesus. So this is the prophecy. Basically, Isaiah is talking about that the birth of the Messiah is going to save people of Galilee from the darkness of demon possession. And what we have this particular, I would say, what we have in Mark chapter 5, this story of demoniac, we have Jesus basically stand down with the demons. And your question is very, very, very specifically. So let's take a look here, and it's very tricky. So it describes, let's just read for our viewers the story, Mark 5, Mark 5, verses 1 through 5.
They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him, and he had his dwelling among the tombs. And no one was able to bind him any more, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken into pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains.
Okay. So that's the prehistory. Probably most of our viewers know it. But let's pay close attention to verses 6 through 8, how they are written.
And gashing himself with stones, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit."
And let's read also verse 9.
And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many."
Okay, let's focus at verse 9. What is your name? With whom is Jesus talking here?
The demons.
Let's look carefully in the verse 8. With whom is he talking? What does the verse
The unclean spirit.
He is talking.
He's saying, "Come out of the man."
Unclean spirit. In other words, this is the essence of demon possession. A person is fully controlled by the demon. So this poor man, his body was bowing down, but in reality, it was like in today's, sci-fi movies, where you have, remote control over the robot, and you push the button. So the unclean spirit, and Jesus was able to see right through. He even didn't pay attention to the man. He was right away facing the demons, and demons actually afraid of him, as you can see. Yeah. They know whom they're dealing with. They know he's not equal to them. They know it, and that's why, it's like he's talking, "What's your name?" We're Legion, so there's many of them, so yeah. So this particular case, what's very interesting here, we began with Isaiah 9 and 8. We discussed the prophecy that this child is actually going to save the people of Galilee from the darkness of Spiritism. So when we look at what is happening with this casting out demons, in fact, in the Gospel of Mark, we have already a second time Jesus faced a demon-possessed. In fact, very first miracle which Jesus performed in the Gospel of Mark, going back to chapter 1, was in the synagogue he found a person with unclean spirit, and he cast out the demon. Then, so this what was Isaiah writing? This kind of a demonic worship, similar to probably a voodoo style.
Okay.
So it's very similar. What was in Galilee, we have all kinds of archaeological evidences for this, that this was a terrible satanic cult, which people were involved there. Jews came back from Babylonian captivity. First, they moved all the way to Judea, because remember, the northern kingdoms, they were far gone, occupied by Assyrians, for many centuries, was only Judea. Judea, Jerusalem, even when Isaiah describes Judah, Jerusalem, Judah, Jerusalem. So eventually, Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Jews or Judeans and Benjaminites, to be technical, and Levites were taken to captivity. When they returned, they first returned and rebuilt Jerusalem. But then they kept returning. Judea was too small. They began to settle Galilee. And in Galilee, they settled along the side with those pagans who came in, and in place of these tribes of Zabulon and all these northern tribes. And they were constantly in contact with these people, and
they learned from them.
Unfortunately, especially as you can see, you have like a young man in a synagogue. It's like this was a disaster. These cults were attractive. They involved lots of wine, lots of sex, and with that kind of, but wine and sex was a hook and sinker for people to come in, and bam, Satan loved those Jewish boys and girls who were trying this out.
Oh, wow.
And they would come back, and they would have, they'd be in a synagogue, like this man who was first healed from the unclean spirit, and this particular again. So this is what Isaiah predicted. And look, in Isaiah 9:6, where we talk, for the child is born to us, what is the name of the child?
In verse 6, it says, his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace.
So this is interesting, because then you find that in Mark 5, the demoniac, the man that's possessed by an unclean spirit, recognizes the divinity of Jesus by saying, he says this in verse 7, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?
Demoniac, or the legion which is inside of that demoniac? That's the question.
It's interesting. Wow.
This conversation leads me to believe that it's legion.
Yeah.
The unclean spirit.
They knew exactly who is in front of them. Pharisees didn't want to recognize.
Wow.
Priests didn't want to, because they saw, how come you man making yourself God, you're blaspheming. Demons exactly know what's going on up in heaven and who is who in heavenly realm.
Yeah, because verse 12 then says all the demons begged him. So we know that these fallen angels, these demonic entities, they recognize that Jesus is God. Now I'm curious, Pastor, What correlation is there to the demoniac and that miracle of him being healed with this woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, along with this little girl, Jairus' daughter, who's also healed? What is the Bible in Mark trying to say about Christ and his miracles?
Well, let's keep looking here with the situation with the woman. So let's just read the passage here. So it starts with verse 25 and verse through 29 for now.
Mark 5, 25, 29.
A woman who had had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse, after hearing about Jesus, came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. Immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction.
Yeah, so basically, this woman has a serious issue, probably not a regular monthly cycle, but some cancerous issue, since that kind of a bleeding. And so, it is what, according to Leviticus 15:25, let's just read it 25, and then we'll read 27.
Now, if a woman has a discharge of her blood many days, not at the period of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond that period, all the days of her impure discharge she shall continue as though in her menstrual impurity. She is unclean. Any bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her like her bed at menstruation, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, like her uncleanness at that time. Likewise, whoever touches them shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening.
So, people kind of misunderstand this passage, especially in some cultural contexts of Tibet and other cultures. But in the Torah, leprosy, blood issues, discharges from the body, which is also relates to men's situation concerning like infectious wounds and stuff like this, childbirth, they were considered as impurities, not sin, nothing to do with unclean meat, but it is a ritual impurity that symbolizes the manifestation of sin in our body.
It was a different category.
Yes, it was just a symbol of mortality. So that's why somebody who is unclean, according to Leviticus, cannot come to the temple, cannot eat peace offerings, so nothing to do with the temple.
Wow.
And so impurity, as we can see, that impurity is can be transferred. In other words, it's not that somebody cannot take care of a sick wife, but if he does, he cannot go to the temple. It's like, that's the rule, so he has to follow the rule. So wash and don't go to the temple until the evening. But this poor woman, she was so distressed, and she went and she basically touches what actually means the corner of the body. It's like the clothes. I mean, back then people didn't wear shirts or jacket. What was the upper garment?
The tunic?
Yeah, no, talit. Talit was just a fabric like this, it was serving dual purpose, upper garment and blanket.
Oh, interesting.
And according to the Torah, they have to have these tassels on the edges of that, and so this woman is touching that tassel.
Wow.
The question is, why is he doing it? We have an answer in the book of Malachi, chapter 4, and it says here in verse 2, first sentence of verse 2.
But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings.
Wow.
The sun, what kind of wings are we talking about? What kind of wings does the sun have?
Rays?
Not really. When we talk about the wings, think about this. You have this like fabric.
Wow.
You put it like
the
this.
fringe of the garment.
Yeah, this is like a wings, you know.
Talit?
Talit, you know, you wrap around, you know.
Wow.
That's why people, you know, like Ruth is asking Boaz, put your wing around me, so it's a
So it's like your blanket, garment or blanket is going over someone.
Yeah. It's a protection. When you cover somebody like this, you try to protect. So this woman knows the prophecy, and she is seeking Jesus for protection. And she better be, because she went through the crowd. How many people touched her?
Clearly, the disciples didn't care to count because they said, you know, all these people here and you say who touched you?
Yeah.
Notice what else Jesus is happening with Jesus. Let's go to Mark 5, verse 30.
Immediately, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" Not even who touched me, who touched my garments?
Yeah, because think about this. If somebody is wearing like this, a garment, and it's hanging out, and somebody just touches you won't, if
Yeah.
it doesn't pull, you won't feel it.
True.
Right.
You don't have a nerve ending on a fabric. So, but how did Jesus perceive that somebody's touching his garment?
Because the power went out from him.
The key here is the power. What kind of power is this?
Healing power.
Divine power.
Wow. This is cool.
Divine power. So, we have a sequence here. Number one, the storm obeys him. So, that's the creative power, you know. Then you have demons acknowledge him, and now the power departs from him, and the woman that was unclean immediately becomes clean.
Wow.
So all this sequence, you know, starting from chapter 4, right, he spends a little bit of time in teaching, which is, you know, the parables here, unlike Matthew and Luke, are very, very short. You have a little bit of discussion with the Pharisees about, the healings and other ethics, but then go back to the miracles, and now these miracles are very, very significant in a sense of application of straight, raw divine power. And this one is one divine power. And of course, then he comes finally to the Jairus home. And by the way, who is this Jairus?
He was a leader in the synagogue, right?
Yeah, what does it mean, leader of the synagogue?
Not sure.
Leader of the synagogue. So the synagogue has usually, even up to today, like if you go to any synagogue in Minneapolis area, you're going to have a rabbi, and then you're going to have a president.
Really?
Yes. Basically, the main administrative rabbi is the one who teaches. The main administrative responsibilities are with the president. The president chairs the board. So it's been for many centuries like this. So,
And it is an elected position?
yeah, basically it's the prominent member of the community. We don't have a clear evidence back then how the president, today it's elected position, but back then we're not sure how it was. But we know, think about this, Capernaum is like a small town, and there is the synagogue, and there is a president of the synagogue. So it's like he's the head of the Jewish community of this town.
He's a big deal.
Yeah, he's the head, because the synagogue may have a rabbi, may not have a rabbi, but they would have a president, and this is the highest position in Jewish community.
So is there any significance from the fact that Jesus, when he's going to heal Jairus' daughter, before he does so, he in verse 39 says, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." Was there something about the tumult? Wasn't it customary to have weeping wailers when somebody died? So what was it about that Jesus was...
Again, when you come to Capernaum, the town is small. So, of course, it's a little bit off the shore. So he gets off the boat. He's immediately greeted by the highest man in this town, who believes in him. So it's big. We often say, we often have a stereotype that Jesus was rejected. Not really.
Not universally.
Yeah, not really.
Interesting.
I mean, yeah, the priests in Jerusalem did. Some Pharisees who were jealous of him did.
But people loved him.
Yeah, but here is this society, Galilee, here is the president of Jewish community of this town, and he is asking to lay hands on his daughter specifically. So he's inviting him to his house. He has a full confidence, and he better be.
Yeah.
Who else was healed in this town before? The very first chapter.
The young man who was demon possessed in the synagogue.
Number one, and number two, the mother-in-law, Peter's mother.
Fever.
Yeah, fever.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Which was also a big deal.
So this had circulated around town, and everybody knew, wow, this great healer is among us.
Yeah, they recognized Jesus.
Wow.
That's why it was always back Capernaum. Here. So in other words, the way how it was back in those days, you got Pharisees and rabbis. They were like traveling preachers, quote unquote.
Okay.
They come and go, but. The local residents, they welcomed Jesus, and they were accepting Jesus, because even though the Pharisees who came to, when this paralytic, they had to lower him down through the roof, and they were accusing Jesus in blasphemy, which is rightly so. By the way, because if anybody says, if you live and you say, "Oh, I forgive your sin,"
That's blasphemy.
It is blasphemy.
Wow.
So, but Jesus is the only different case.
Amen.
He has the power.
So I guess it's safe to say that there was a mixed multitude of unbelief and true belief, because by the time you get to the end of Mark chapter 5, and Jairus and his daughter and the wailing, verse 4 says that when Jesus mentions that she's not dead but asleep, they laughed him to scorn. So these people who are laughing at him must have been some people that were among those who did not believe.
Well, this kind of reaction was probably she wasn't breathing. So by the time Jesus gets to the house of Jairus, and it was a test of his faith in a way, because he kind of paid attention to this woman and all of this. I can imagine what was going on. Especially look at verse 35. They say, "Oh, your daughter died." So they definitely knew she wasn't breathing. And when Jesus comes, "Oh, she's sleeping." Of course, the reaction would be, it's kind of be sarcastic, because why is he saying he's sleeping? But in reality, he comes in, Talita kumi,
Wow, little girl.
in Aramaic, and she gets up.
Pastor, thank you so much. This study has been amazing. John, thank you for being here. And you guys at home, thank you so much for joining us. Please stay tuned for next study on Mark, lesson chapter 6. Make sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends.